Hello, also from Maya, like Italy, I see around the corner.
Hi, Caro from Barcelona.
Hi, it's Linda from Sydney.
Hi, Christina and Maya walking here around.
Everyone who just joined, we're just saying hi. So if you could just make a sound and
Hi,
just
Jeremy from Singapore here.
Hey, Jeremy.
Hi, I didn't introduce, I just said hi. So Italy here from Palawan, Philippines, Maya. Nice to be able to be live with you all.
Okay, so we could start soon, I guess. Hope you're all well. We'll let more people come in. This call is more for the Americas and for Asia and for Australia. So I'm really happy you could join. Yeah, it's really interesting. We're actually winding down on the first trimester. It doesn't mean we're not going to have continuous calls throughout the break period. When we're having a break, it's actually a good time for us to do some more practical calls between us, particularly for those who are interested in music, playlist creation, but also how to like conduct your workshops. We can have more calls. But the calls that we are conducting within the global Zooms, they are curricular in nature, so we're following a particular format. So we sent out a PDF 2 weeks ago in preparation for the calls. There's some complexity there that's quite deep, and I'd like to go over it. So it doesn't matter if you looked at the materials or not. They're really just there for more academic level study process as we really come to know the energy that we're holding. So I hope you're well. I think it's evening in the Americas and it's morning time in Asia. We're going to try to keep this conversational. For one, I'd like to play a particular video. I've been wanting to document some of the demos that we're doing in Maya. And I thought there was one in particular that actually could very much interrelate to the topic for this week. So I'm gonna hope that my sound gets shared. Okay, wait, let me introduce this first. It's really important to bring context. So I'm gonna feature the body and energy of a long-standing inner dance facilitator. I mean, she hasn't really been holding that much space over the last years because of motherhood. She lives in Canada, specifically Vancouver right now, but she's originally from Poland. And I remember she was one of the first people who started to conduct inner dance trainings a long time ago. We're talking maybe 8 years ago. Around 7 or 8 years ago, she was conducting some strong processes in Europe. And it was a precursor for a lot of other trainings that would come about throughout the rest of the world. I find Natalia very interesting. Primarily, she goes very deep in the inner dance process. But particularly her processes are very emotional in nature. Like she's never had an inner dance process that was not emotional. And so another interesting thing was I was trying to go back to the old songs of inner dance during the trainings here. Wanted to refer back to them just to study what was in the old processes that we were holding in conjunction with how we're doing things now, all of which we're going to be studying together. And I couldn't find any of my old songs. It turns out that someone had arranged those songs in Spotify a long time ago, and it was actually Natalia, the lady that you're going to be meeting momentarily. So I want to bring up certain themes today regarding time and space, code and context, around this question, like, is there a difference in the experience? So this could apply to your own process, but as you hold the space for others, be interesting to go into a dialogue as to what are the different ways to hold the energy. Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna share the screen now. I'm hoping that the sound would come out. Let me know if it doesn't. That means I might need to make some adjustments.
That my body after all these years, but this was so interesting because it was not personal. Like we were talking yesterday, Ito, you were mentioning this was the feedback that people were giving you guys, right? And I get it.
You never had an innerdance that was impersonal?
Never.
Yeah, never.
Never. It was always personal. Always. So, wow, this was like experiencing pure energy in a detached way in a little bit, I guess. It was beautiful, it was lovely, it was joyful, but I was feeling very physically, in a tangible way, electricity all over my face. But like, I thought you were shocking me with something. I thought you guys were like touching me with some, I'm like, what's happening? Because it was all around, like, you know, pins and needles, not even pins and needles, it was like really
Like
sharp electric feeling all over my face, all over my, especially my head, but also my arms, I think too, I don't remember now. That was incredible. Like what? I was just, and I was experiencing this dance of energy inside. It was going, it was just like a wave, up and down, and I was observing it. I could see the white light too. It was expanding all around me.
We were laughing.
Was I laughing at? What was I laughing at?
Laughing.
Yeah, I remember that. I was laughing. I know it was just felt so. It felt so good. It felt so good. I don't even know why. I don't know why. I have no person. I don't know what this is. It was so incredible.
I wanted to borrow her body because I used to call Poland the land of polarity. The land of poles.
But this was really. I didn't expect
It was
that.
quite short as well.
Short. I loved it. Like what? How do I
People call
even?
it like a brain surgery. They call
Yeah.
it, more targeted, directed stuff. So we will teach you how to use hardware and like apps you could download into your phone, where you could maybe use multiple speakers now, like in the space. Where you position the speaker makes a world of difference. Tiny movements, like here, and there's no rules. It's for you to learn. Contrast differences, movements. But you see what I mean about layers.
Yeah.
We're not sequencing now.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like at the same time, what would you do with that?
1,000,000%. Oh man, so mind blown.
Yeah, because we play, right? We discover. But do you see what I mean about starting simple? I didn't use a song. There was no song there. It's like what the basic rudiments of the song are would be oscillations and a small drum. You have a small drum machine there. You just provided something constant at one point. But the main instrument here is electricity. This is electricity. Analog synthesizers, they manage electricity. So we'll bring out like really small devices that manage electricity. You can either use a digital synthesizer or an analog. So this is analog. Digital is something you can download on your app for free. What I like about it is you can sustain, because when you play a song, it goes up and down already, and you can't actually help people to find that space, that real space sometimes, so that they themselves are healing themselves. They're not being evoked, they're not being pushed or manipulated. they can create their own music in a sustained way.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to use that as a starting point. Not just for today, there's so much to study. I wanted to initially share with you that there's a guiding philosophy behind innerdance that's been there for quite a while now, and it has allowed us to go forward into some degree of complexity. So people would rather things were simple. Could you just teach me how to put songs together and play them in a certain way? And how do I touch bodies? What do I say? How do I open a session? The philosophy will guide you so you would know what to do instantaneously without sacrificing your creativity and your autonomy to make things up, whilst you do have an anchor inside. Okay, so we're going to go into quite a number of thought domains. So we're just going to go into it and look for my iPad. So we keep this conversational in case you had like questions or ideas. Feel free to raise your hand or just make a sound, and we'll bring that into the space. It's always important that we're in this together. All right, so okay, I haven't used this in a while. Oh no, upgrading. Just a moment. All right, okay. Let's clean this up. Nice and clean. So one thing I want to talk about today, and I'm sorry I have a bit of a cough since last week, so if I'm not like making this uncomfortable noise inside your ear. I want to talk about the loop. This is something DJs, musicians use, but this is something that's quite often, if you facilitate long enough, you're gonna hear this word like loop, like people are looping. That somehow we're either breaking the loop, which for some people is breaking in, maybe more like breaking out of the loop. So we need to understand what is the loop to begin with. Some people actually break into the loop. So wait, let me just close this so we can just do a bit of storytelling. There was one person who was part of the training we just had that ended last week, and I didn't know much about her background. She's from the Ukraine, and she told me in her dance here that she somehow broke out of the loop, a loop that she'd been into for years. I didn't know that she actually attended the first CAP training. She said it was in London a long time ago, and somehow she had been looping on and on. So I wanted to understand what is the loop. So I've heard this many times, and I have my own understanding of the loop. You might have to be in this work for a long time to understand what is a loop. But what is a loop anyway? Like for you, what does it mean to loop, right? Maybe you can hold this question out there. What is the loop? Have you heard this before? Is this yeah, Oscar, you're nodding. Maybe let's see if you can contribute to.
Well, I pretended to leave the space open for the guys, but yes, loop is something that in music can be something that can be take and can perform a complete cycle, and you cannot determine when it begins and where it ends. Basically, music is about it, yeah.
Yeah, totally. And it's something that we're able to use to actually bring about the loops in people. For me, a loop is more of a repetition. Yeah, like a cycle. It could be a repetition of an event, a thought pattern. It could signify why do I keep going back to the same emotion? Or why do I seem to keep going back to the same trauma? I don't put a value judgment whether a loop is good or bad because there are reasons why a loop can happen. I don't know if you remember this movie Groundhog Day, which is about this man who got stuck in the same day over and over again. And because he got into that loop, it actually forced him to look at himself and to undergo a change. So people in the spiritual process who enter the loop, there is a reason why we are being made to look at something repeatedly again and again. So there might be a reason why we would bring up the loop in others. But also, on the other hand, if a loop just sustains itself without insight, without actual transformation, then I think we would be searching for ways to understand the relationship between the linear and the circular. So bringing this up ahead, the types of music, for one that you choose would either create loops or break loops. And from Natalia's sharing, as you can see, like she's not used to inner dance without the songs. So introducing her to frequencies and noise and not even allowing her body to move instantaneously into the movements allowed her to, at that one point, even just within minutes, to break from the loop. And that's partly what she was describing. So in Maya, it's very often because of the way we do things here, we experiment a lot with different stimuli. And very often we hear people say, like, wow, I actually broke from an emotional cycle where I naturally just keep going into this same trauma, the same shame or guilt, or so suddenly something breaks, and we're interested in that. In the spirit of inclusion, we're going to validate all the experiences, all the styles. They all do different things. They're all valuable. So what we would do is hold up a kind of structure. You're going to go into a structuralism this week because that's something else the Ukrainian lady came up to me with. She said, I didn't actually know that there was possibly a structure to hold this energy around. And she was really actually amazed that this energy could be constructed in a very conscious way. It's not just something that we're going to be relegating to the unconscious. All right, so, okay, let's go. I guess now we can go into the notes.
First time ever, I did not read the notes.
It's all good.
Student.
All right. Okay, so there's one really interesting term that I read like a long time ago, and inner dance is first coming up. It's called consensus reality orientation. I think it was by Charles Tart, if I remember. He's a psychologist. When people watch the inner dance at work, like in the experience, and people go so deep, a lot of people initially were worried. Are people going into a trance, or are people going into some kind of hypnosis? You might get this as well in your own work, where people would ask you, is there some kind of hypnosis involved? And there is a general fear against hypnosis because hypnosis in a way is a way of losing voluntary control. And a lot of people are scared of losing voluntary and involuntary control. How I come to see the conscious trance that does happen in inner dance is consensus reality orientation is what we might think of as, the matrix, reality. It's the real world. It's three-dimensional, earth. So in many ways, inner dance might actually be the opposite of a hypnosis. What if inner dance was the breaking of the hypnosis? What if consensus reality orientation was the actual trance? So when we watch people's bodies, minds, energies come about, maybe this was a possible answer you could give to others. Maybe we're always in a trance when we're programmed and conditioned to be a certain way, to think and speak a certain way. What if this process was in fact the breaking down of that trance? And so the loop in a way is responsible for holding continuity. Some kind of continuity takes place. You wake up in the morning, you sleep at night, and you went through a loop, right? You would go into this continuous loop. So one of the things that's happening in the process in body and mind is we are disrupting. There's a kind of disruption element that we're studying. It has something to do with music, with proprioception, with context, with words. So we're disrupting the loop. But interestingly, when we disrupt the loop, we actually start to see an even bigger loop. There's an even bigger loop, and it might go in an opposite direction sometimes, but there's a much bigger loop at work. And this is what we might call the meta loop, or the story that binds all the stories together. Some kind of bigger picture, some bigger bigger story. And the word that we would use to connotate that today is the code. There's some kind of code that binds contexts together. Okay, so we're going to need a definition, both from a philosophical, theoretical, and a spiritual definition of what is code. Because normally when you hear code, you're thinking about information technology, but code comes up a lot in linguistics, psychology, and philosophy. It holds a big part, and in the work that we do, it could hold a really, really big part. So I asked you, or invited you, to look at the website, to look through the website. Let's maybe open it up now while we're together. Okay. And then let's go to the orange wiki. If you haven't had time to go over this because you were busy or just wasn't the right timing, you can feel free to go over these. I want to go over some of these sections today. In particular, I want to go into aphasia. Aphasia would lead us into a brain science later on, and psychology that would be very helpful. In particular, I want to go into a form of aphasia called Wernicke's aphasia or receptive aphasia, which is the moment when people lose the ability to understand language, whether it be spoken or written. There are people in the process who, for an hour or for days or weeks, they lose their speech. I mean, no, they don't lose their speech. They lose the understanding of the speech of others. They would just listen to others speak, and they wouldn't understand what's happening. And in so doing, we can enter into a Jacobsonian mapping of the two dimensions of mind, coding context, bearing structuralism, to understand that there is space and time in the mind, and we have an ability to facilitate these apart from each other or simultaneously. Okay, so we're lucky enough to have Saule with us today. She's in Maya right now. And I don't know if I brought her up in a previous Zoom call, but she's actually my one-time, big-time favorite person in innerdance who's ever gone into Wernicke's aphasia or receptive aphasia. Okay, when she went into maybe not just months, but probably a year or more of going into a 0 point, she experienced receptive aphasia. I'm just going to paraphrase her, and then I'm going to ask her to share things with us at certain points. I started writing you because I realized I don't know how I feel. It has nothing to do with the old. I don't know how I feel. When there's so many feelings that you're just confused until you sort them out. Now it's just nothing. First, it was meaning that was missing in the words. She didn't know what some words, concepts, or symbols meant. She could only seem to play with the meanings. Others skipped to the words, but in her, it wasn't there. It's mostly from a kind of memory, which wasn't holding so strongly in her own. While I cannot really make up new content as the actual meaning is unknown, I'm talking more and more about things like time, space, energy, and consciousness. She didn't have any more of the same feelings with really simple words like hello, thank you, table, chair. Although just now she had it with hello while writing it now. She felt empty emotions wise. I think this is really, really interesting for us to study in like the long term. We have been bringing up the concept of emotion now. Emotions seem to be connected to memory. The part of the brain that registers emotion, the amygdala, is very near the hippocampus, which establishes memory. Yeah, just a lot of words about like not knowing what the words mean. It's like being a baby. She just talking about feeling, she just lost the definition and feeling of feeling itself. So it wasn't just the conceptual frame for feeling, but also the actual emotion of feeling, which is feeling itself. When I say this, it's not just a word that represents it that I'm unable to grasp. Feelings themselves feel alien and an unknown construct. And I'm in some sort of 0 point. May as well just keep going. This might bring things up in Saule and in us. I have that strong feeling of being at the beginning, like at the source, the starting point. I had it already in Palawan and I called it the 0 point, but it seems like I'm going deeper and deeper into it. It's interesting she's in Palawan right now as well, going through some other 0 point. The beginning of the beginning of the beginning, the word deeper implies space in this place. I refer to as spaceless. Okay, this is important. I'd like her to talk about time because she's beginning to describe that space that she went into in receptive aphasia as a time where no time existed. Like time for her wasn't even a thing. I keep feeling how we first enter the world with this feeling of choicelessness, the lack of choices when it comes to the circumstances of our lives. Those narratives we're introduced to. So choices plays a big part, something we are initiated into, probably related to causation. Later, we can, okay, this is maybe a little too complex already. All the structures fell apart. That's what happened to her. From the deconstruction, one is born, emerges from the 0 point, and feels this full-blown freedom to recreate. Rebuild what? Like the mind, the world, the body, the brain. Although as a precept swallows up the concept, not much is actually being done. There really is no need to do anything until one finally realizes one is back in choicelessness. There's nothing to do. Understanding that it is all unfolding and talking to itself in some interesting sort of loop or a circle. Yeah. So I think that's a really good starting point. We really need to ground some of the concepts with an actual experience. I don't know if some of you have gone into a kind of 0 point, but the descriptions of Saule, for me, have been common in innerdance throughout the years. And what is rare here is I'm not always able to talk to people from a meta perspective. Meta is to go above. It's to think about thinking. It's to look at the structure within the experience where there is no structure, so that slowly as the mind is reborn, something starts to build itself. So with that, it's actually really okay to start with very basic foundations. So veritably, what Saule went through was aphasia, and this is the homework for the week. This was the reading on the Roman Jakobson essay. Hard to read, take a year. And if you master it, you would have an academic backing for the work that we're doing. All right, so Saule, maybe we could invite you to speak a little bit, and I could. Oh wait, I don't see her. She's there on top. Like we could ask some questions to help you in case some words need to come out in exchange. But when I read your words, which probably could be interesting from like an online virtual meeting moment, are you brought back in a certain way? And then having watched Natalia and then observing what's happening to you now, what's been happening to a lot of people for the years, could you contextualize for us in very, very simple terms in the beginning, what happened when you went into a 0 point where no time existed and you couldn't understand what people were saying? Could you also just describe what it was like listening to people? What was it like to experience language from that point of view?
Hello, everyone. Yeah, it's interesting to listen to all of this being read, and like I'm not sure if they're really my words or somebody else's. It's almost like it's a different person listening now. And it kind of triggers definitely some sort of a remembrance, but also is very much mixed up with whatever I'm going through right now. Yeah, kind of triggers aphasia altogether, like comprehension and production one at the same time right now. But I will try to gather myself and speak, especially start with what I can remember within me about what happened back then. I did tell the story to one English man that was here in January training. He asked me if there was a clear point that I know that the language came back. Because the duration of this 0 point process was more or less 9 months. It kind of started in Palawan and then ended in Vanuatu. And the thing that I can really pinpoint that did leave and come back at those times was the time. I lost time, and I feel like the comprehension was kind of together with it, because other than that point, I don't know how and when it actually happened that I stopped understanding people, except for that it started by stopping understanding people talking about time. And it seems like meaning making is so tied to the perception of time that when you move it out of the equation, like all the other meanings just start falling apart. So yeah, the process itself was that I just simply, like, more or less saw kind of the structure of the universe as I thought at that moment, that's what I was seeing, like a torus, and like the loop was the word there, the main word that was part of the process. Like the whole thing was about the loop. It just even me realizing the loop was looping itself into a loop, and it was just like, yeah, the loop was part of the thing. And if you remove time, in a way, maybe all you have is just one big loop, like that torus donut kind of thing, which just in every section, no matter how you section it and how you look at that space, it's loopy in all directions. So yeah, I kind of saw that, and the absence of, like, time was not there. Of course, the only way I knew time at that point was linear time. So of course it seemed like, as if this is not there, then there's no other time I know. This is just a reflection from now. Back then it was just linear time, and it was gone. And yeah, so when I started hearing people making references in time, it just seemed like they're talking nonsense. and I remember this particular moment speaking with some people that were living in Maya at the time, Isa and her partner Evan, and they were talking about ancestors, and I was not part of the conversation. I kind of stopped being part of conversations because I just couldn't contribute in a way to any of the things that people were talking about. And so they talked about ancestors, and I just looked in the space around me, which seemed to be like the space. I mean, I knew that ancestors was something that was before us, so it refers to the past. So I kind of look behind me, and like there is no ancestors behind me now. I don't see them, so like there is no, they don't exist, like so these kind of things. So and then leaving Palawan, I met up with Pai for lunch, and he just came back out of this kind of prolonged silence that he used to sort things out in his head, and came up with like new structures for things, and he was excited to share those, and he was just talking and I don't know. I think it was the deep story process that was being born. So there was time in it, and I understood nothing. I was just doing I was really like putting all the effort and concentrating on the words that he's speaking, and I'm like looking and listening in the words, and it's just like words, 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 which at the end I cannot even repeat. Not that even like I'm able to understand. And it was I just felt very bad for Pi. Like myself, I didn't really care that I don't understand. It didn't like I didn't feel bad, but I felt bad for people who are putting effort to say something and expect like some sort of feedback, and I just cannot give it because yeah, there's no.
Well, you couldn't give it at that time. So then that could bring us into like a really long story, which doesn't have to be long right now, of you reinserting yourself back into the concept and the experience of time itself. Because almost like what you're sharing, that was my same experience coming from the island. I didn't have a time construct as well because it got erased in me. So that deep story point, especially the Vanuatu thing, was for me the graduation point. Going into one of the oldest yet youngest cultures, like tribal cultures in the world, and meeting you and your mother there. It's there's the other directionality as well that we could look into, which would be a whole thing altogether as well. But if you want to put some words into that, like just to help people like visit this as they also leave the current maybe gross concept of time and then move into other experiences of time, but through more space. Like, what was the reintegration that happened after 2000, I don't know, 19 or 18 into today?
So when we were in Vanuatu, I think it was the point that my mom kind of got introduced more into the innerdance frameworks, and after the whole emergence convergence event, we were just spending time together, the two of us, and kind of going into some sort of a 0 point there too, from which yeah, I don't know, I'm thinking like what is the good point to tell the story from. And well, basically we had some sort of a process where my mom also lost time. It was just very spontaneous because she said something about, oh, it took us like this and this amount of time to get here, and I said, yeah, that, like, my reaction to that sentence was so pure from the space of timelessness that it snapped her out of it, like that very moment. I said something, yeah, that time that took us, like it was in my words. I cannot say the words, but it was in my words that was so clear that I was just making a joke out of her sentence. And suddenly she's like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, and it's like really no time. And so she was like enjoying that kind of not enjoying, I mean, I was enjoying her experiencing that. And She's like, really, there is no time, there is no time, there is no time. And I say, well, yeah, there is no time, but there's, I've been here already 9 months. And there's this thing that kind of is strange about it. Like, why are we getting old then? How come we're getting old if there is no time? Like, I'm just sometimes thinking about this. And then she gets out the papers that, like, the night before Pi left, he drew like this coordinate system of space and time, and she gets them out, and it's like, no, wait, and yeah, and in there we just somehow find the time. We find it there, that it's actually there, and everything kind of opens up as the library of Interstellar. So the difference was that actually when the time came back, it came back as a 3D space of time. And that was the difference. Like the old time never came back. So in a way, for the new time to enter, I had to like really erase the old perception of time in order to be able to hold the new one. And I guess each one of us have different capacities, or like different strength, how much we're holding on to certain linearities in our lives, and we require different amounts of time in that 0 point space to be able to kind of deconstruct and then reconstruct something new. Yeah.
Wow, yeah, there's a lot of things here I've not heard before, and it just really makes sense. So the timing is absolutely perfect. So thank you, Saleh, for now. We'll maybe get back to you if certain things come up, and even for you, if some things come up, just volunteer it. I was observing the Lithuanian brain, body, mind, because it had this very easy tendency to go into space, almost just like that. And it was being modeled through either aphasia or through, and I find it really interesting. There's something very pure, but I think it also has something to show us around the actual structure of consciousness. Now, for me, if left to its own for too long, without structure, it could lead to a whole bunch of things. It could lead to emotional imbalance. It could lead to ego inflation. It could lead to addiction. But if within a certain level of authentic pilgrimage, it could lead to real growth, I think. And I've been observing Saula, and I've been observing a lot of people. There are many people who are really doing the work, and it's very slow, and it's very beautiful. So it's actually an honor to be able to talk about this in a very real way. So it's not just her mind and language that's changing. We say language, not just production of language, but reception of language. But it's also the brain, the nervous system. The body is undergoing what we might call a transmutation. So I'd love to go into particularities with these. I find I cannot go into playlist creation without having an anchor. And the anchor is here. All right, so let's go back to the screen now. Okay, so structure. Is there an actual structure? Structure is it holds a lot of meaning in the philosophies. And I'm enjoying listening to this from Saula's perspective, and also being triggered by the Ukrainian lady who talked about the loop. We had quite a few Russians here and Eastern Europeans in the last training. And a lot of structuralism actually begins with the Russian. Maybe from a USSR perspective, Russia is a lot bigger than just Russia as we know it now. Russian philosophy, particularly what's called Russian formalism. So I'm going to bring this up as something interesting for you, that you might walk away today knowing a little bit more about linguistics and philosophy. And so this does bring up some element of time, not history in terms of something that happened a long time ago, but more of how consciousness evolves over time, or how about how our understanding and experience of consciousness changes across dimensions in what we make up as history. If history doesn't actually exist, there is nonetheless a change that takes place. So Russian formalism for me is a very, very important piece in understanding the structure of consciousness through inner dance. Before, Russian formalism shifted into what would later be called structuralism, and then later it would be called deconstruction. So why is Russian formalism important? For one, it studied the nature of language, where sound or vibration, the vibration in the language itself brings about the meaning. And this had been erased through semiotics, through Saussurean linguistics. A lot of academics, mostly they don't believe that the sound, the vibration, the music, and the words that we use hold meaning. One concept that bears understanding of that is onomatopoeia. It's the understanding that the very sound of, let's say, the word baby or the word tree, the vibration of these holds meaning. In Saussure, in his semiotics, he didn't believe in an onomatopoeia. He believed basically that the arbitrary sounds in language really just happened historically. We made them up all across the earth. So whether you're in the east, the north, the south, because of the climate, because of the theory of natural selection, the sounds were arbitrary and differential, and there was no divine spark that coordinated like a global meaning. So you might imagine why this might be important for us, because we're interested in sound, we're interested in vibration, and very often when people visit upon the sound, what people might say music, could be frequency, could be silence or noise, could be the spoken word, meaning starts to come about. So we're actually going back to a Russian formalist idea, bearing onomatopoeia. There are certain religions, there are certain cultures that really believes that the way you speak words are sacred and they hold meaning. You know, like the Aramaic, the Hebrew, maybe the Egyptians, the Greeks. A lot of this had gotten lost along the way. So we're going back to the roots of meaning, and sound could be important there. So that thought existed in Russian formalism. And the essay that I shared with you in the PDF, it's very interesting because Roman Jakobson observed two types of aphasias, which he might call code or context aphasia, whereby when people lose their minds and their language, they seem to either lose it in accordance to time or to space. And to listen to Saule, she went extremely into space, and she abolished time. She abolished the concept of time from her brain for 9 months. Such a nice, beautiful amount of time, you know, exactly what it takes to create a being or a person. She abolished time and she became space, and she is still alive now, and you can listen to her, and it's amazing. So in the Russian formalist tradition, which is quite near Lithuania, and Lithuania used to be part of the USSR, the structure that I drew for them in Vanuatu was actually coming from them themselves. I just gave it back to them. So of course it would have made sense, almost bearing a code to the context. So we would wonder what is code and what is context? And is there a way that you can lead or construct a playlist that would either be more code or context based? So if you haven't read the essay, you could read it later on, if it's interesting for you. If not, then it's okay too. But our playlisting styles will come from these notions. So let's start with the, wait, let's, I need space. This is taking up too much room. Smaller. Okay, so let's start maybe with code. What is code? From what we know, code is, in a way, kind of convention. So when you think of language, code in language, for example, you cannot really make up your own language. Otherwise, it is not a language. So when we are born and when we are initiated into language, when we go into the Chomskyan notion of language acquisition, or LAD, language acquisition device. When you learn to speak, for a child to learn how to decode the conventions existing in language, the child has to be encoded into language itself. I find that a really powerful term. Like, what does it mean to decode these letters that I'm writing or these sounds that I'm speaking? So that requires initially a gross conceptualization of the term, like that required time. And I can maybe understand Saussure why he came up with semiotics as something that required historical, arbitrary experimentations with all of the sounds. You know, like, let's say the early humans, we made up all these sounds and we created a convention maybe hundreds of thousands of years ago into tens of thousands of years ago. We arrived at a convention. Right now we're speaking English. We could be speaking Spanish or Chinese for all we choose. But for now, you're decoding what has been encoded in you that has also been encoded in the group. So that when we come into any reality, it could be a Finnish reality, it could be a Japanese reality. That reality is a code. Say you ride an airplane and pass through the airport, you enter into a code, and a baby born, this is what you're born into. There's like a choice almost. Initially a primal choice that then would shift into choicelessness if we were to go into the space perspective that Saule had given, that we chose to eventually fatally, you know, based on fates, to be born into convention. So I think the one thing that we're looking at right now as to the work, say you decide to call it inner dance or something else, the inner dance seems to be a bona fide way of either momentarily or, I don't know, for a much longer period, leaving the convention, leaving the common, leaving the code that requires time. Even though technically code is about space, context is about time. Like to Saussure, coding required time. Later through deconstruction, this would be debunked. In deconstruction, through Claude Lévi-Strauss, he would propose that actually it didn't take history to construct a language. Everything was created all at once in one simultaneity, like boom, language existed. I think there might be spiritual interpretations of what that means, but in Saussure, it did require a history. So it feels like inner dance brings about a brain state that momentarily deconstructs time and brings us more into space. So I think that's a necessary starting point. So that would start making sense when we try to define what is code. Okay, I want to sense how Jakobson might have come up with this originally. Like later on, there are many amazing. Wait, I'm trying to draw a straight line and I can't hold my iPad properly. There are many possible mappings for space and time. Like code up here, context here, that would just be one of them. You could talk about the synchronic, the diachronic selection or combination. Could talk about maybe different playlist systems. In inner dance, we have musics that's more in space and music that's more in time, sequential or layered music. You either produce in a studio or conduct live. We're going to be learning about these. This is what structuralism looks like. So in Jacques Lacan, in Sigmund Freud, in Roland Barthes, in Jakobson, there's actually like a host of, or like a convergence of dream theory, of psychology, of linguistics, of philosophy, of brain science that looks at the matrix of time and space, bearing the construction for how consciousness works. And a lot of this is very cogent, it's very coherent, because they were very attentive to each other's thoughts. And they saw a lot of convergences in work that's normally separate from each other. The work became unified, and in inner dance, the same unity exists. So before this, I want to go to Jakobson. Jakobson has some really interesting theories we would study in the long term. For me, Roman Jakobson would probably be the most important philosopher in inner dance studies. He came up with a regression hypothesis. He hasn't. One of his interesting thoughts is he came up with a translation theory that gives us three types. One type of translation would be interlingual, which would be translating, let's say, Chinese to Greek, American or English to Russian. Intra would be the translations within the language itself, like from word to word. Now, one interesting type of translation Jakobson came up with is inter-semiotic translation. This one we would study as a kind of structuralism and inner dance in the long term. So within this proposal, he's thinking about the way sound translates to images, translates to maybe words, translates to feelings, translates to shape. Is there a translation happening between semiotic dimensions? Is there a semiosis happening? And the synonym for intersemiotic translation that he puts up is called transmutation. And transmutation is a word that did come up in a previous Zoom call regarding the esotericism model. So transmutation thinks about an actual transformation happening in the body. So let's say you expose someone to music, it goes all the way to the body. Like the body undergoes an actual transmutation or transformation, which is caused by the movement from a particular semiotic domain. So some people are more vibratory, some people are more into pictures. No, there might be more of a narcissism happening as opposed to tribal sounding out, or some people might be more into semantics or making explicit in words what
Pai,
some people.
Are you writing on your pad? It's
Sorry,
frozen.
I have been. Wait, okay, let me repeat. Okay. Yeah, so I hope it's there now. So that's one theory in Roman Jakobson. This is not particularly what I want to bring up today. What I want to bring up is Roman Jakobson's 6 functions of language. And this is where code and context might have come up initially. So code and context are really just 2 of the 6. Okay, so this is not complex. It's beautiful to look at. So for a communication to happen, there are 6 functions. Let's say there's the speaker, what you might call the addresser of the speech act. And then this then would split into 4 different dimensions now, or functions. One would be the code. Let's put context down here. One would be the message. I may as well put content, but let me put message, it's more clear. Content was a word that came up in Saula's writing. And then there's the channel. So for a communication to happen, and a lot of people like to use the word transmission, for there to be a transmission of information to happen, there needs to be the meta structure, the message itself, and then the medium. I think let's just write medium because it's better. They all start with the same letters. Medium. So it could be either through the written word, the spoken word, it could be emailed, it could be through a painting. And then all of this would be then received by the addressee. In communication theory, later, I think this was completed by something that makes this more circular, and that there is a feedback that takes place between the speaker and the listener, who then take turns. So code would be the meta. It would be a function of language that arises in people who become interested in, how am I even speaking at all? Where am I getting the words? How am I organizing my meanings? Not a lot of people think that way. So a lot of people who evolve to a certain point where they're not as worried about the next meal, or they in evolution, when people start to get interested in their meta-cognitive or metalingual construct, it signifies an evolution in a way where people become interested in their own structure, whereas people were really just conveying meaning purely just because they needed what they needed. They wanted to speak clearly to get what they wanted. So code would be present in a lot of you who are becoming interested in your own consciousness. So context would be more of the environment. Very often context could be seen as the purpose. Let's say, what's the point? What's the ecosystem? to allow the message to be heard, because contexts can change from point to point, situation to situation. So without context, a message would simply be it wouldn't have as much use, you know. So all of these are going on at the same time, and I just wanted to point out to you that primarily this is probably where coding context came from, as components or functions of language that may not normally come up in people's consciousness if they're really just speaking for the sake of speaking. So in innerdance, because innerdance is a form of communication, we would be interested in the different functions that are at work, as, let's say, this is the facilitator, this is maybe the person laying down, and then now you are studying, okay, like how do I hold a space? Like, what would be the words that I use to open the space in a safe way, and also in a wise way that leads people into either history or into geography or into the universe, which goes beyond history and geography as we know it. You know, like what would be the layerings? What would be the what would be the intention? And then what would be the set of rules, the conventions that you would hold that almost influences the birth of a new spiritual community or a spiritual culture that you're holding. All right, so that's where coding context comes from. Now let's go back to the grid now. In seeking to understand structuralism. Okay, so the essay that I shared with you primarily focuses on coding context. Now, I've watched a lot of people. I've watched tens of thousands of bodies either go into code or context. So we might say context is more to do with time, the element of time. Code would be more the element of space. We could look at this from a literal perspective, but that would be boring. So, okay, someone went into space. That means they went into code. Maybe that's true. And someone talked to the ancestors or went back to a childhood memory. That's more going into context. Okay, those are maybe the simpler ways of understanding. What are maybe the deeper ways? Interestingly, observing Saule's mind at work, like one thing that does get affected when code is activated is it becomes very hard to name things sometimes. So literally, I have watched people go into innerdance, go into space, go into code where they actually lose the naming capacity so that they can't even utter their own name. Okay, like I've watched this. I would literally go up to someone and say, what's your name? And then I just watch them and they couldn't say it. So that's what it means to go into code. It could be that extreme, or it could be a little bit less. To name is to define. And this is like a technology that we have innovated in us, you know, like a lot of animals, they don't name. Most animals, they don't name things. Maybe they can make a sound that emotionally or energetically makes reference to an event or a situation. And, you know, in the animal group, between the animals and the animal group. But humans are able to define and to define is to make definite. So let's say it's ironic, isn't it? You take the infinite, which is pure code, that interstellar library, and then you find a way to make definite the parts of the infinite. And this is what we worked hard. We worked really hard to get to this point where we can name things. And for one reason or another, a lot of humans are more interested in the unnaming in stages in the journey before they do go back into the naming. It's very hard to live in the world without being able to name things. So space involves what's called selection. When you access code, there's a selection process that happens. In language, for example, when you speak words, you have to select the right words in a kind of library where you store all these meanings, and you do this automatically. Like right now, I'm selecting words, and in time, what you do is you combine what you have chosen, what would be the gross constituent units, the particular elements. So in the awakening process, it's actually this that first goes away. When we go into space, selection becomes more difficult. It's almost like words are too limited. They're too finite to describe the infinite. Because getting to do that does actually require a brain state. Now, one brain state cannot exist with the other. So you cannot conduct selection without also tapping into combination. You can't go into code without context, because it's hard to describe, but you might know what I mean. Like they both need to coexist together. One cannot live without the other. Otherwise, there really is just one point, that point in the middle. There really is just one point. And as soon as you make that choice to be birthed here, you will shift into the structure. Okay, so I'm describing here the spiritual awakening and a type of aphasia. Okay. The code aphasia is very loopy. So when that happens to people, either because of accident, it could be a spiritual awakening, an energy process, or it could be the brain just gets affected. Like people have concussions or maybe a stroke, coming out of a stroke, then sometimes there's more code happening and people start to loop around certain things. In spirituality, in communities, people do loop around basic words. They use words like energy. They would look for words that they can loop around, because that it takes energy to undergo selection, and especially combination. And when you don't want to use up too much energy as you're undergoing neurogenesis, you tend to go around in circles, describing the same thing over and over again, even though you probably know what you want to say, which is quite deep. You're not always able to speak it. You're not always able to speak it. Going to structuralism, one interesting thought existed in Jacques Lacan. And I think he wrote an essay called The Unconscious in the Letter. And one of the main points in that, one of his contributions to structuralism is looking at this grid, there's displacement as opposed to condensation. Okay, this exists in the dream work in Sigmund Freud and in Jacques Lacan. So there are either dreams that displace, where there could be many dreams, one after another, or there could be just one dream that starts to hold all the elements in place in simultaneous synchronicity. So displacement describes something in language that either is loopy or the opposite of the loop. Okay, so Lacan and Freud describes how in language we try to arrive at meaning, but sometimes it can get really frustrating where the more you try to describe something, the more you actually push meaning away, so that you don't arrive at meaning. It becomes harder to arrive at meaning. And that's because of time. Okay, like when we live too much in time and we're trying to contextualize what might be more meaningful in code, the more we use the words, the less we actually arrive at the heart of things, like the pure essence. I don't think this is true. I think it is possible to use words and arrive at the truth. But one must have lived, one must have undergone transmutation often to be able to undergo that arrival. But this seems to happen automatically in dream time. Like dream condensation would be the psychedelic phenomenon or the spiritual event, the innerdance process, where suddenly all of the content and the contexts, they come together in pure space. Where we bring time into it is if you're there and you're not able to navigate the space interstitially, like then the loopy part would be everything's just one thing. Which is all well and good if you're like a fairy spirit, an angel, or a baby. But if you live in the world, this would still need to land into context because context holds its own circularity. So in a way, the more you go into space, the more you actually go into time. This is the irony here. This is maybe where the experience of Saula goes into the second generation, which he is beginning to describe, that there is time, but it is not the gross conceptualization of time. It's not time according to Aristotle or Rene Descartes. It would be more time according to David Bohm, to Max Planck and the quantum theorists. It's not Newtonian. It's not Newtonian time. So there's something in language that is loopy unto itself. And Noam Chomsky uses the word recursion to describe it. So recursion can be understood in many different ways. So let's say I try to define a word. Let's be meta about it. I want to define the word word. The only way I can define the word word is to use other words. And I could go on and on recursively, infinitely, so I wouldn't stop defining a word. This is one way of understanding context, so that there are some people who go into aphasia, either from a neurological damage, psychological damage, it could be through trauma, or it could be a spiritual awakening. I've observed this in Saula and others. Very often, she doesn't have the words unless you are able to bring something in conversation. And then the more she absorbs, the more information she absorbs, the more she's actually able to hold the big code. Like the pieces start to come together. So I'm sure a lot of you are experiencing this. So in the work that we do, it's very important you don't just hold music and energy. It's really important that you uncover a clear languaging, because language structures the unconscious. That's a structuralist insight. And what information you hold will influence others. So in the PDF quotation I put up by Roland Barthes, what is it? The structuralist activity is as follows. The structure, no, wait. Yeah, structuralist man and we may as well say woman. Structureless man takes the real, decomposes it, and recomposes it. This is huge. Maybe Barth didn't even understand the implications of this back then because they don't have the brain science that we enjoy now. But he's talking about a transmutation so that when you are listening to anything, like right now you're listening to my words, you could be listening to the music or your mom speaking or a baby talking. You're taking the real, and the real is a very real thing in Lacanian structuralism. You take it, you absorb it, and then you decompose it inside. So God knows what's happening as you're listening and watching me doing these things. You're decomposing, you're throwing things into the compost. And when it is your turn to facilitate the energy or to train other people or to hold the space for other people, a recomposition happens. So from the compost, the seed grows in a garden or even a forest. So this is the structuralism. This is what it means to hold code and context together so that when you do give information to people, that decomposition will happen. Getting people to lay down, if you maybe spoke, let's say minutes before people lay down, already there's a decomposition happening. Depending on the music you use, there would be both. Oh, wait, why is this blurry? There would be both a decomposition and a recomposition happening at the same time. There are certain musics that would decompose, and there are certain musics that would recompose. And over the next months, we're going to study this from a chemical and electromagnetic set of terms when we think about brain waves, brain regions, neurotransmitters, and hormones. Certain styles that you use would either decompose or recompose. And it depends on where people are at. Sometimes it's not even you. It's basically just what is happening. Okay, so let's deepen the conversation a little bit more to make this practical from a playlisting perspective. So a lot of people want to go into construction work now. They want to playlist, they want to build the constructs. So let's assist that. Let's just erase the whole thing. So let's think about songs. And watching Natalia's experience, that was about frequencies where we were using synthesizers. Then there could be what? Noise. There could be words. There could also be silence, right? This is if we're just looking at the auditory space, not the visual space, not the tactile space, the olfactory or the gustatory space. We're just thinking about the vibratory space. These are your options. So let's say were you to build your own playlisting system, you would need like a library to store these together. So you're thinking now, wow, that's really actually meta. If I constructed my language unconsciously, one of the boons or gifts this work actually gives is for you to consciously organize your own structure. And if it's not going to be a thought structure, it could be a sonic structure. So you know, like you can mirror how the organization is happening between your mind and your devices, which are extensions of your mind, really. And if you can build a really beautiful bridge between what is inside and outside, then, you know. So when we study playlist creation, we would be studying how you can undergo selection processes in space that would later shift into combinations where you would organize these in terms of time. So we're not going into these too fast because you have too much to choose from, and we don't want to just go over these one by one without giving you a kind of structure. So I want to think about songs as opposed to or counter distinct to frequencies. So listening to Natalia sharing, she said, songs instantly brings her into emotions, and the emotions do bring about a kind of loop, which would be repetitions in emotion, thoughts, memories, and so on and so forth. So if we are interested in bringing people into the loop, then we would use songs. If you were interested in breaking people out of the loop, then we would use other elements such as this or this. This would be both. It could be both space and time. Silence could be the space between space and time, because there really is never such a thing as silence. Silence, as we know it, is actually the pure tone. It's what is beyond the sine wave, which is pure tonality, but it's not silent. It's an ability to coordinate all tones in synchrony. So yeah, like what is it about songs then that brings people into emotions? Okay, so looking at space and time, one thing you are doing, were you to look at this from a meta perspective, is you're organizing in space your meanings, and those would be recognizable as concepts. Words are concepts, basically. They're like folders of the mind, and I've been very interested in conceptual containers. So that I'm able to use words now because I was able to organize my conceptual containment in my brain, my body, my nervous system, and in my own spirit. It took me years to be able to do that within the innerdance construct, and I seek to help others do the same. Innerdance really just being a metaphor for flow coming into form and vice versa. So what are concepts then? Concepts are categories, and all of these are special folders in you. Each word is in a way spatial, but it's also very historical. So when you're born into a world, you accept the categories that are part of the space. Otherwise, then just don't enter the space. You know, there is conventionality. There's beauty in the conventional that we can enjoy the construct. Now, there are different levels of categories. There would be, for one, say, let's look at 3. There would be basic level categories. And then there would be, at the lower, there would be subordinate categories. And then on a higher level, there would be superordinate categories. So what would be the levels if we were to look at songs? Oh, where are they? They disappeared. Songs, frequencies, and silence, or maybe even words, right? For me, maybe words or even noises, arbitrary noises might exist on a basic level. Frequencies might exist in a superordinate, and songs would actually go into subordinate. Why is that? Let's give an example. So the way your mind works, you normally need to categorize your information according to levels so that you don't get lost. So one example of that would be superordinate category could be, let's start with the basic level. Let's say car. a superordinate for car would be vehicle. And there are measures for what makes something superordinate and basic level. It depends on the how you visualize the image. So it's very hard to visualize vehicle because vehicle could be ship, helicopter, spaceship, and you can't think of all those at the same time when you think of just the one concept. Normally, anyway, by way of okay, and superordinate category could be a sports car. It could be I don't know, it could be like a jet plane, or it could be a mountain bike. That would be a subordinate category. So songs in a way would be subordinate in that way because songs tend to be much, much more specific and less general than what's at the basic level. And the superordinate is much, much more general, much, much less specific than songs. So depending on whether you are wanting people to visit upon very, very specific things, understanding from the stories of people like Saule, where the energy brings us is more on to superordinate dimensions where even concepts like time don't exist. You can't get more general than that. Only space purely exists. There is no past. Understanding that the work does actually take us more towards that. Using songs has been a habit. I'm sorry, I need to find out who's unmuted. I think that was you, Flor. Okay, let's share again. All right. Is it sharing? Yeah. All right, so this is why people use songs, and that's why people are not using songs. This is why maybe sometimes people use songs sometimes, and why some people would not use songs sometimes. I was looking through the website, and one interesting experiment that was happening over the last weeks was by Gra. So Gra created a new playlist. Across Time is the first playlist composed with stories spoken in Portuguese. So there's a spoken word in it. But then she deconstructs the word elements. So let's see. She was using like quite a lot of different apps and effects. Okay, this is interesting. Another technique used was the usage of common songs in uncommon scenarios. So she chose like a Coldplay song. I haven't listened to the playlist yet. So she reversed the song, so maybe people recognize the scientist. Or maybe they didn't. It could be maybe a subliminal recognition. And there's this one comment from 3 days ago from Mariam. Dragon's fire deconstruction. But even as she was going into these very cosmic elements, she was taken back to her core trauma because of the words that were spoken. She was able to visit her traumas. Okay, so she's still able to go into the personal, but at the same time, she was able to step back from it. So here, and Gra especially is very interested in structuralism. It was her thesis in her master's degree a long time ago, where she would look at semiotics, Assyrian linguistics, and so on and so forth. So the way she was conducting her playlist, she's very interested in time and space. I only saw this today. I only looked at this today. So I think that this is very, very apt. I want to make sure that my iPad comes out, so I need to reshare. I'm sharing. So yeah, so I think this could be more or less like an introduction into playlist construction for you that's structural in nature. were you to delve deep into philosophy, one thing that you would find if you entered into studying structuralism would be there's often a distinction between form and content. So for example, the study of interpretation is called hermeneutics. It's the theory of how something might be more meaningful. You know, how do you tell if it's a good book or a good movie or a good painting? Hermeneutics would provide a theory of interpretation. But hermeneutics is very, very disinterested in form. So think of form as maybe let's say the vessel or the chalice. And then the content would be maybe the liquid, you know, the water or the orange juice. So some people are more interested in the cup. Some people might be interested in, say, the coffee. You're saying that it's really the coffee that's interesting. But then when you put the coffee inside this thing, then the shape of the coffee would change. And some people would say, no, it's really about the substance. But there are actual people who would say it's about the medium. Like that McLuhan statement that when you change the medium, the information would change. So that, let's say you look at the difference between sending post through snail mail. Let's say like you send this through the post. Would the meaning change if it became more of like an email? Because of the speed, because of the feedback systems that email would bring, would be instantaneous, differences in time and space, the nature of the content itself would change. So something we're actually looking at here continuously is the body and the mind. So very often when we think about the mind, we think about the contents of the mind. And yet the body is the container for these contents. So that if you change the container, would the content actually change? If you undergo a transmutation of the body, would the mind actually start to shift? So this form and content distinction that has been ailing philosophy for a long time, to a space holder, form and content is beginning to become indistinct. You know, like the vibration, the frequency might be the form, and then the interpretations of the experience, the process could be the content. But then again, you might be looking more at context, and when you bring all that together, you might be holding more of the code. You are one of many people possibly who are seeing there is no distinction. Like form is content. The masculine is the feminine. The East is the West. So you are healing the mind-body split here. You're bringing about a restructuralism that needs to undergo a kind of deconstruction. Like one interesting thing to observe within this form content distinction, if you were to study Western philosophy, in Russian formalism, a lot of the formalists were really looking for a science, because when they were looking at the nature of linguistics and psychology back then, it's just really, really messy. And they didn't find any kind of systematicity in space. And a lot of people would say innerdance or energy process is about getting rid of the system. But I beg to differ. I feel that we actually become more aware of the system that is at work when you heighten sensitivity. But something interesting in Russian formalism that might contribute to how we would interpret so much information that would be coming through when you hold the space. People would say, okay, I saw a dragon, I saw the color blue. I saw Santa Claus, I saw my mother, and they're gonna be asking like, what does it mean? Does it mean anything? They'd be asking themselves that, they'd be asking the universe that. In a way, like it is meaningful, but in a way it doesn't mean anything because the meta system would be more interested in how are you even constructing the meanings. Okay, you're not interested in just the meanings, you're interested in how meanings are made. You're interested in the meaning making process. Meaning making is how you send out meaning, and how meaning is received is called the process of signification. So you wouldn't be interested just in the content. You would be interested in the encoding and decoding process. And if you're going to be a space holder, you might get lost if you lose the meta here. So Victor Shklovsky, here's another name. Shklovsky uttered the statement, the role of art is to make the visible a little hard to see. And one thing that annoyed the Russian formalists or the structuralists for a time and a half are the poets. You know, like the poets seem to never get anywhere. You know, it's just a lack of science. They just keep metaphorizing and making analogies, and we don't actually ever arrive at meaning. That we're really just displacing meaning. So we never come to an arrival of meaning. But where I find Shklovsky's words quite relevant in the innerdance construct is normally when people are thinking they're when people think they are, how does that happen? Seeing something. It could be like an object. It could be an image or a symbol. They tend to take things literally, when in fact what they're seeing is usually a lot deeper. There's depth to what is being seen, and technically the visible needs to somehow become more invisible, because if we can look deeper, then we can see the invisible. And this is precisely what is beginning to happen in the inner dance process. We are beginning to see the invisible. But were you to choose whether to hold more context or code, when you do get attached to emotions, let's say, okay, I just want to keep playing the songs again and over again. Like here in the Philippines, people keep singing the same karaoke songs nonstop, again and again. They can't seem to break out of the loop, that particular sad song that makes the whole world sing, or something like that. There's a cultural loopiness to it that doesn't seem to be able to break free. And I've been interested in how people might be able to liberate from the same stories that seem to act out, that brings about like a lot of sadness and a lot of distress and certain emotions. So we are experimenting with different musics that hold more noise and frequencies, even in the schools, maybe in the prisons, and so on and so forth. This is us making the invisible, let's say, making the invisible easier to see. And code-oriented techniques can do that. If your technique or your intuition, or let's say your intention, is really just to contextualize things, which is time-based, then we're not bringing people into the let's call it the Saulian 0 point, the Lithuanian zero point that is able to go into pure space for a moment, whether it be a month, 9 days, or 9 months. Later and continuously, we are interested in how people can move back from space to time. There is the becoming time of space, and there's always the becoming space of time. This in deconstruction in Derrida is what is always at work. So either you bring people too much into space and you will start hearing these terms, people are looping, people are spacey, or people are also either stuck in their own stories. They're stuck in their trauma. So you need techniques to bring people into the spaceship and the time machine. They're both really quite valuable, actually. So I'm not by any means invalidating the use of songs, which a lot of facilitators around the world are using. Those are very, very helpful in bringing time constructs. So when I think of Sala, then when she was here in Maya and then she went into that receptive aphasia stage, we were actually starting to experiment more with spacey sounds. We were using apps that were less, like contextual or emotional. And it was really leading up, maybe starting from 2016 all the way to 2018 or 19. A lot of the experimentations were bringing people more into spacey. So I'm really happy to have a historical point of view through Sala's experience, because I feel a lot of people are negotiating time and space in their own selves and in their gifting to others, how they might introduce this work to others. And it should be useful for you to hear that you have these options. Okay, so I think I've spoken quite a bit, almost 2 hours now. I want to open the space for possible dialogue, whether it be for questions or sharings, realizations, insights, ideas. So if you guys could help me out, even those who have been studying for a while. Okay, Sala, you unmuted?
Yeah,
Let's hear from
I
you
just
first.
wanted to say that there were a couple of questions in the chat. One question disappeared that was related to the playlisting, asking like if songs bring the loopiness and the sounds something the
It's okay.
opposite.
Sorry, I can sorry, it's my question actually, so maybe I can just ask it. So I had a
Hey, Jeremy,
question.
please.
Hey, sorry. Yeah, okay, so a little bit of context. I'm so happy that you talked about this topic because this coming Saturday, I'm going to host my second inner dance, and I wanted to experiment with framing, with a frame, right? So the whole frame here is, okay, like a lot of the participants are struggling with the relationship with the personal mother. So I was actually thinking about what kind of journey, what kind of container could be created to help them to journey through that personal attachment, and then to deconstruct it and to send them to the connection with the cosmic mother, or like with nature, with mother nature, so that they can broaden their to break up the loop, right, with the attachment that they have to their mother or the context that they are holding, and to find new ways through which they can relate to the mother within their system. So I think my question pertaining to what you just shared about space and time, if I know it's a very easy way to categorize, okay, songs equals to emotions, frequency or noise equals to space or code, right? So could you share a little bit about what happens when we mix and layer the two together? Like there's a song and then you're distorting it, and there is, like a frequency layer on top as well. Like what's actually happening in that framework that you just shared?
Beautiful, Jeremy. And I'm glad you're already holding space. I met you in Singapore, and I know what you're working through between styles, which is for me interesting. Singapore is interesting. And for those who are not familiar with Singapore more towards the Chinese culture where inner dance is spreading. So when you speak about the mother, then it could be from that Southeast Asian or Chinese, East Asian configuration. I think if we were to borrow from Eastern tradition, then partly yogic, partly Oriental, then it's very important that we bring people into the emotional, feeling-based approach, but there's enough in people's vocabulary to understand the witnessing part. So it's really important that we feel what is there, because consciousness is embodied and people live lives that are very real, that are very condensed, very pressured. So I think a model in Singapore would be, people don't have the space in places like Singapore. I read somewhere that Singaporeans are the fastest walkers globally. You probably might agree to that. They're always in a hurry, especially when you need to make it to the MRT. So people are trying to jam a lot of information in their head, so they don't have the space. So this conversation is super relevant already when you bring this in, that what you're providing is a space where people can have the conversations they can't have. So in the Chinese Singaporean language, it's very hard to get meaning to really get conveyed, because the East is always battling with this the West. There's so much logic out there, but at the same time, there's so much there's a lot of emotion and there's a lot of pressure. Let's just say pressure. Your mother always wants you to be someone you don't want to be, and there's always this fight. So you're not always able to speak things out. So I think it would be interesting to design a process where people can have the conversations with their mother that they can't have. For that reason, emotions will play a part. But having spoken the word witness, the frequency layer, which could be a noise app layer, it could be a synthesizer layer, or even just a meditative music in the background, how could you get them to feel while also observing? Without attachment, whether bodies move, people cry or not. The witness would be more the indigo chakra, wouldn't it? It's like the ability to see and to receive insight. And sometimes that would happen from a subconscious space. Sometimes that might emerge in the conscious. So you need to construct waves in a way that people have a chance to feel. But then the witnessing would sometimes be in the transition towards another dimension, where people might be half asleep and suddenly they're dreaming. It would be happening in a non-emotional state, or somewhere between emotions. I don't know if you know what I mean. So it's either you're creating a sequence where you give them a gap. You need to give them a gap to be able to rest, and that's where the insight or the witness would come. And then you need to get them to feel again. So then a kind of confrontation. It's the difficult things, the stuff that they can't tell mom. Or even there could be a stage where there would be empathy for the mom, because often when you're trying to fight the mom, try to negotiate with the mom, it's very hard to feel where's the mom coming from. And that might take more than a couple of sessions, the thing with the mom. When I worked in the Singaporean and Malaysian ecosystem, actually the most powerful thing I realized that could be spoken would be certain statements people need to hear. Let me give an example. Like, it doesn't matter what they are thinking about you right now. And then I would just be shocked at how relevant that is for people. That people really need to hear that, because they're so stuck with it really matters what my mom is thinking, and I'm obliged, and it's all about expectations, and I can't break free. So you need to almost make that explicit in shame cultures, where a lot of these conversations are implicit. They're not clear. They're embedded in the culture. They're embedded in the family systems. The Western aspect would be that which makes it clear. The Eastern would be that which allows it to be felt. So there's a great balancing act I think that needs to happen in the Singaporean playlisting process. You might bring up like some traditional Chinese music or Indian music, or then you'd mix that up with some techno EDM with some meditation. We don't know. It's going to be up to you actually, because these experimentations belong to this time. The old inner dance processes in Singapore 10 years ago would be quite different because we were simply using songs. You guys would be the first to model this continuously.
Could you share a little bit more about the gap? So maybe you could give an example of what is before and after, and what, so that I have a little bit more understanding of what that gap might look like or feel like.
So gap could happen after a release stage where people have cried or people have their bodies were moving. So the gap would be you're not stimulating motions or movements. So that's where visions would appear often. Insights would surprise people. Like bringing up the loop, the word loop really came up in me in Singapore, mostly in Malaysia when I was doing work there. People were looping, so I'd be coming back again and again to Singapore, KL, and then people were still in the same emotion or trauma, and I didn't know how to let people break from it, because if I give them too much of the trigger, when they go back to the emotion, there's actually an addiction to re-traumatize themselves, to be in the loop. So I think the gap might be longer in Singapore for this reason or another. The gap could be just the beginning, or it could be in the middle, or it could be in the end. Just give them time to relax, really trust before you create the buildup. And even when you do, then drop it. This would free you up and everyone in your community, Jeremy, because if you didn't feel pressured to get people to go into a specific construct, whether it be a Kundalini thing or this and that, then you can relax. You just let them be and give them time to just process. So I don't know, I hope this makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. And yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think I'm having so much fun in the whole playlisting process, and I love what you talked about, how sounds when predates language. So one of the things that I'm experimenting with is to like introduce a Twinkle Twinkle Little Star Lullaby, and then to distort it, and then to like in a way crash it. So the goal is to like bring familiarity with songs or things that or nursery rhymes that we used to hear, and how do we create a conflict through sounds. But I'm also thinking about, is there what's like what you talked about just now, like what are things or that we always wanted to say to our mothers but we never got to say, and how do I put it as part of that playlisting process, or maybe even through the process of facilitation as I'm walking around, just whispering those words for them to receive and see what happens as well.
Amazing. Allowing your intuition to work this through would be key. So in the beginning, maybe because you're only starting out now, you would start out initially conservative with the process. In a place like Singapore, there's actually a lot of space for high intelligence, high wisdom, but also high weirdness. So you can really push the boundaries once enough context allows people to go more into code. So really widen your vocabulary later on, especially because Singapore has the three cultures, the Malay, the Chinese, and the Indians. And then the Westerners are all over the place as well there. So I think you want to create a multiculturality so that you don't get stuck just with particular songs. Just keep channeling. Okay, how do we even bring this deeper? But high intelligence means really being sharp with the way you contextualize. People would really appreciate that you're not just going around in a circle, but you're actually evolving through each and every stage, right?
Thank you.
All right. Okay, Trudy, your hand is raised. Let's hear from you.
Yes, hi. Thank you for this. Thank you for this. Talking about the 0 point just now. It made some sense for me. So I want to share two things, and a couple of things, and I have a question. I actually took your Anything's Possible playlist, which I believe is all just sound. There's no songs in it, I think. And I actually wanted to try one session in the morning and one session in the evening just to see the difference, right? So what happened for me was when I woke up in the morning without doing anything, I just put this music on and I went into it. And it was really bizarre because I went into this void, really deep void, and there was nothing. When I came out of it, right, I was like, oh, 1 hour has passed. It seemed like it was just like 5 minutes ago. And it was really strange. So, and then I let it pass for a day, and I realized that I had moments where I was trying to say something, but in the midst of my sentence, I couldn't figure out the word. So it was really strange. I was relating this to Fiona. And then the following evening, I did it maybe about like 5 o'clock or so in the evening, and I played the same thing. I didn't have the same experience. I did have like the sense of darkness going to a void, but a lot more conscious of it. But I didn't have that time feeling, so I went through that hour and I went, oh, okay, it's a lot longer. So I in a way, I think talking about this gave me a bit of an insight to it. I haven't sort of gone any further in that, but I have when you talked about silence just now, amongst all the frequency, noise and everything, right? In all the mixing that we've done, I mean, at least so far, I'm quite new to this. I've only heard like music, noise, and layers, right? And they're all generally always something in the background. There hasn't really quite been silence per se. So how does silence factor in a playlist, and what will it create? Is it just for integration, or how would you use that?
Okay. Yeah, silence is the space in between. So let's say in Singapore, are you in Singapore or Malaysia? You're in Singapore, yeah?
Singapore.
The singing bowls would be close to silence because there would be harmonics in harmonics. There are certain bowls that have less harmonics. And putting that in as symbolic silence would either happen in the beginning or in the end, but you could also experiment with in the middle. Then that would give people the necessary rest time to collect things and put things together. I really especially feel that people in big cities, like the busy ones, they need more the integration periods. So I don't think we need to keep triggering people. So you might experiment with certain sessions, really just being more integrative. You'd always mix in the trigger mechanisms. But what you would notice is a lot of people have been through waves. They might even be able to desensitize their old triggers so that they might just be there and they're just in meditation. Don't be tempted to do too much because sometimes they're really just not able to describe what's happening. Just letting them be allows for a reconstruction of the brain and the body and the mind. The temptation is usually for us to try to make something happen, but often we really just need to undergo the shift in a way that's not explainable. And if people become clear with that, then some people they're always comparing themselves or they're trying to latch onto an experience. That's not always interesting. But in terms of anything is possible, I like it that you're observing the difference between the morning and the late afternoon. And I think that could be interesting when we look at the chemistry, where cortisol and melatonin are bipolar in the early morning and in the late afternoon. Cortisol levels are normally high in the late afternoon, and that kind of meditation or energy process could lead more into conscious states where people can confront problems or receive solutions to crises that they were struggling with. And in the early morning, it could be more staying in that dream state, like that baby state. So I think those experiments are really, really valuable because if you were to maybe systematize this to clients or introduce this to institutions, letting them know, even companies, for example, who are interested in their employees healing from sleep deprivation or whatever conflict. It could be like a sickness, like a cancer. There are benefits in the morning, but if you wanted to even meditate as a company group or something like that, like different times of the day would be different inner dances.
Thank you.
All right. Fiona.
So it's actually Noel here. Hello, everybody. Hi,
Hey,
hi.
congratulations. These two just got married, by the way. So
Thank you. So I wanted to, because I work a lot with the gongs, and definitely one of the things that I do at times when feel called to is to actually really go into a space of silence, which means I intentionally don't play anything, because sometimes they say the silence is deafening. And as per what Trudy was mentioning, a lot of the playlist things, sometimes we use singing bowls, or like you mentioned, as the part of the silence. So what is your thought on actually using pure silence within the playlist, intentionally creating that space of silence before we go into another space? Will that actually come across more of like a triggering thing? Because all of a sudden, where did the noise go? Where did all the sounds go? Instead of really going into that deep space of silence. So that's my first thing. And then the second thing that I just wanted to mention is that I found this quite interesting. This is just my own perception, is that how we relate songs to emotions. I suspect it's because how we were embedded with these emotions when we grew up. So I'm very curious how it would be like for somebody who has not been influenced by, to say, the words of songs to create those strong emotions inside bodies. And then we can go on to this journey, because it's like how we already created this preconceived notions of what these words, the songs are meant to make us feel. I'm just curious about if somebody didn't have this pre-construct notion, like babies who are very pure, and then you let them hear this songs without knowing what the meaning of the words is, will they actually get the same emotions as most of us adults who have been framed into this construct? So those are my two questions or thoughts.
Well, there's definitely variation that we've seen over and over again. Variation meaning diversity, where someone might be screaming their head off, and then someone is really just there, either not feeling anything or just not getting triggered at all. And a room could be cut into half. I think when we bring up the song versus frequency or noise or silence element, it's interesting to study what is going on inside people. But I think when we bring it up, it has sometimes to do with the intentions that the space holders have. And we're speaking to the manipulative element that has come up in many healing cultures, where songs especially are being used to trigger people. We're really just setting the stage to get many of us interested in other parts of a repertoire. It's like having more tools. So in terms of the silence, I think this is really interesting to bring up more and more, because we're making more and more noise, which is actually bringing up silence in people, interestingly, whilst in some people, they hear a lot of noise in the silence. So in today's reality, we need to be honest with the fact that people are going to be jumping between noise and silence. So the music would be in the in-between. I think a lot of people would be ready for silence after they've gone through a lot of the chaos. And then that would create the integration. Like, you can't have light without darkness. And it was Osho that had the most distinct realization with this. That's why I came up with dynamic meditation, because he was asking or getting these people to sit still, mostly Westerners, Europeans, and they just couldn't sit still because they had all this tension, this junk in their bodies. And for them to go into the 0 point, they initially needed to go through stages. And one of the stages would be release, disintegrating, melting into the nothingness. So a lot of people, they either do psychedelics, they do breath work, they even yoga. Some people exercise, and then they might reach that space. So because we are needing something accelerated right now because of just the amount of problems people have and not being able to focus, we are interested in silence, but we are in our community definitely interested in the noise. And we have to be careful in how we word it, because right now we are seeing patterns that makes noise actually not just noise. It's complexity. There's patterns there. And if people can sit with the noise just as much as with the silence, then I think that's quite interesting, because there's high intelligence in seeing patterns. It's recognizing patterns in what just seems like a mess. It could be a universe or a brain. It could be like a forest. Like the two extreme pathways would probably be the tantric and the monastic. The tantric would be, okay, let me embrace the world. Let me have intercourse with the world. Let me make love with the world. And then some integration would come from the two becoming one, the world and me. The monastic is the opposite. It's like the world is evil. I'm going to step away. I'm going to hide. I'm going to be spiritual. It's all black and white. They're both probably viable as journeys. So I think the work that we do is either monastic sometimes or tantric. And people need both. People need both. Because if it's too monastic, then there might be spiritual judgment where, okay, I'm white and this is like not spiritual. So we need to get people to embrace the dark and the noisy until such time that they can see through it. We committed to this in a way, and maybe silence just comes up naturally. So would love for you guys to experiment, and remembering that time in Singapore some weeks ago when we were together and there was too much noise already, and we experimented with that silent inner dance, and people said, wow, that just brought us so much deeper. Would we have arrived at that without going initially through the noise? I think the noise really made people confront their own addictions, expectations, their own noisiness. It's not easy to gather 30 people who are holding on to their own noise and making that one music or one silence. And you're going to keep doing that because the group of 30 won't always be it's always going to be different people now. So trying to find the one music. Musicians kind of know that sometimes when you want to tune, you need to create a lot of noise and then a convention. Like a song would come out of that. And we went through that in deep history. So we're almost reliving the entire history of the planet, where we made all of these noises to arrive at language, to now construct a new culture. If we're going to work through order, we're not going to make it. I think we need to mess things up. Like in Mahjong, you do that with the tiles and then you try to find the patterns. It's like we need to do Mahjong with the instruments and people's brains. We need to make Mahjong out of people's brains. Some kind of alien pattern would come from that.
Thank you for sharing, Pai.
Okay, so anyone else would like to share some wisdom or questions? Be happy to hear from you guys. Still have maybe 40 minutes to spare.
Hello.
Okay, now it's your turn, Oscar.
Yeah. Well, I would like to play some things. I'm very, very excited for what is happening personally in my facilitation, also as a company, the process, as a student, and co-facilitator with you in Irene in South America. But personally, I'm finding reflections in all your explanations about the different spaces that we can help to people to enter easily through the process of noise or noising. And also, I would like to say some philosophical things, but I would like maybe receive clarity or expansion about it. First, the difference between music, sound, and silence is the order that is behind. Music is carry the same frequencies and events in the space and time, but they are following a particular order that we can describe in Western or Eastern culture and all these different variations that make the music and the concepts and the label and gender being in the way that they are. But also coming to the area of noising or noise, how we are creating a new order of using noise, how we are structuring noising, how we are making these dialogues and this consciousness talking to noise through noise, and how is the future, how we are creating this symphony of disruption that make possible breaking the patterns, breaking the loops, and creating new spaces where brains and consciousness has not usually been familiarized in order to shifting space and time for them and bringing them to a new timeline for themselves. So particularly I am very attractive to, maybe I'm training my ears about listening the noises and the gestures on a few songs. I'm not using songs, I'm using noises on fragments of the songs. I'm looping that things. I found very interesting a space of how these stages of inner dance is helping to categorizing textures and noises in terms of emotionality, dimensions, and of course, physiological response. And well, I'm just trying to say that there's not big differences. Maybe what we see now in music and songs and in noise is just thousands and hundreds of years of structuralism and conventions being agreed. But what we are doing now with noises and these apps and synthesizers is creating a new model for consciousness through sound, and it is the music of the spaces that we are pretending to open up in order to, yes, create room for the newness, because while we work with the noise, opening new stories. And yes, I just felt to share this from my experience, and I'm very inspired for the class today, for me also in my journey as facilitator. I'm still practicing applying concepts and going to another concepts, and for me is a no ending process. I'm sure that for everyone could be the same. So I'm very grateful for the reminding today of many things that you were talking months or maybe a year ago. Also, in last year, I was this time in Maya. I'm grateful for the months that I was spending there with you and with everyone. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be with you, Pai, and with all of you. And yes, no, thank you so much. I just wanted to put some words about it. Maybe it can contribute to another.
I love it. I really love it. I really love it so much. I want to go into it, in fact, because I think it's saying something really important that looks at what is playlisting at all. Let's go back to space and time. It's very weird. This suddenly just gets stuck. Sometimes make some adjustments. One interesting space and time study point would be narratology, which is the study of how do we tell stories? What's the narrative? Like, how do we construct the stories? How do we tell stories? One Russian formalism approach is looking at the difference between fabula and sujet. I think I might have brought this up in an earlier Zoom call, but since we're in Russian formalism, we should bring it up again. So when you construct a story, the fabula would think about the theme, or like what's the main story. Sujet would be more of the chronology, which is so let's say you're constructing a movie that's based in a book. The director and the scriptwriter has a lot of freedom to either start in some filmmakers might decide to start at the beginning. Some might start in medias res or in the middle, and then some might start at the end. There are movies that actually start at the end. It's really up to you. It's really up to the storyteller. So I really like this concept of sujet or chronology being what playlisting is about. So very often you could hold already the theme, like you know what story you want to tell about the person or the planet, and the theme or the story is based on all of these different elements that are part of the story, whether it be this and that. But it's actually how you chronologize that determines what the outcome would be. So something I've been interested in is, like in schools, in order for the teacher to make sure that you understood the work, you can't really just copy things word per word when you, let's say, submit an essay. You can't just okay, this is word number 1, or it can't be exact. There has to be some kind of paraphrasing, which means, and paraphrasing exists in music, when you're making things up along the way, you're paraphrasing music. So for the teacher to make sure you understood the concepts, you have to speak the same meaning in other words other than how it was spoken. So I think playlisting is really about taking in the possible themes, let's say, but we are working within a bigger diversity of genres, or trying to hop between different cultures, different rhythms, tonalities, and so on and so forth. So you don't want to get stuck with just one particular story point. But once you determine that, okay, this is what I like the gongs, I like this noise app thing, I like this particular music, then you could just keep chronologizing things differently again and again, and the meanings would keep changing. Paraphraseology would shift in accordance to what's happening in the speaker and the listener. So when people are able to create combinations that are weird, are unlikely, are different, are strange, that's when a larger thematic or fabula, a larger story would come about. And you're teaching people that, like, what's a much bigger story that transcends the small stories that people are holding. That's what it means to integrate, to allow a brain, a body, and mind to hold stories that goes beyond one's ego, beyond one's own small context. That is, in a way, what code is about. So a lot of cultures, they chronologize. They're quite strict with chronologization, so that if you break the chronology, you're actually breaking the rules. And a lot of people are suffering from the rules because a lot of the rules are antiquated. They were maybe apt in a particular geography or history, which might not be appropriate anymore. And because the stories are always changing, because we are at new contexts, what people need to drop on now is the code. So intuitively, taking on these skills in, say, music, or what I'm sharing with you all, it's not just about the music, it's about the content. When you facilitate, when you handle workshops and people keep coming back, or when you do trainings, you might actually keep talking about the same thing over and over again, but you would combine it differently, and people would be amazed at how it doesn't sound the same. The more people go around in a loop around the same thing through different combinations, they would get the bigger picture. So I've been doing these trainings for God knows how long, and workshops, and so I've been talking about the same thing, but I can expand, and I can commit to more and more combinations and more selections. So there's something to what Oscar is sharing about music meets the concepts as well. which are parts of the mind, because concepts come from vibration initially, and then later they would become abstracts. But right now we need to deconstruct them first to become vibrations. So there's something really valuable and actually structuralist about what you're saying that could mean a meeting point between music theory, neurology, linguistics, philosophy, and psychology. You know, like how do we construct a new mind? It need to start with like a new music, a weird music, and then a new brain. All right. Okay.
Thank you, Pai.
Anyone?
I would like to say
Amazing.
something else. And
Oh.
maybe it can inspire to the practitioners, as to me is a way to put myself out of the comfort zone. I used to, of course, everyone is using their intuition perfectly, and whatever happens and take place inside the space, it was should to happen, and nothing different supposed to happen. But it's very interesting, and I found very interesting in my relationship with my noise, trying to hold a space with sounds that they are not in the library familiar or cozy or beautiful to me or meaningful to me. And particularly using noises and libraries of my noise that they don't have meaning to me. Especially I'm choosing what doesn't have meaning to me. So I feel that it is very interesting for those that they are very good managing their app in the way that they are mastering it and with the timing that they have on them. But it's very interesting to put ourselves out of the not the tricks, the tools and the learnings, because also as we are part of the space, when the sounds don't have the same meaning, we don't have the same gravity in the space about the same thing. So in my case, for example, tomorrow I will hold the space and I have already 14 selections that they are not my likes. I don't use maybe 8 of them. And I want to challenge myself and my intuition to be outside of my comfort zone and trying also to dive in a space that is not familiar to me when I'm pretending to bring them in a space or vibration that is not familiar to them. So I feel that it works very good, putting ourselves with certain safety, with certain capacity to hold, with certain preparation, but at the same time sharing similar in a different position, but in a similar frequency, the no coziness, the no meaning, because the attachment of songs, the attachment of music is the attachment of meaning. We are attached to the meaning that the song brings. We are attached to the atmosphere that the song suggests. Or maybe it's not a one meaning or one suggest, but we are subconsciously and collectively kind of attached to that. So I just wanted to say this, maybe it can help to new practitioners or older also to challenge themselves for the next session. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to give an interesting example. So because anything is possible was shared, I want to show what I actually did with it. So this is what I did. I took parts of a Zoom call, and then in terms of like using things that don't mean anything, this is what I did. I went into wait, let me get rid of this. The loops section. And let me see. I went into something like this, like sound effects. So what I did was I would drag and drop things that don't mean anything, like airplane cabin, auto race, bark, basketball dribbling, bicycle coasting, big waterfall. And what I did was I scattered them all across the whole thing. I literally would just drag and drop like something somewhere. And it ended up like this. And it's really just a hodgepodge of things that are totally unrelated with each other. Subway pull up in a way, like normal sounds, even like swimming, table, thunder and lightning, whatever, amidst maybe like some TED talk from YouTube, and then this is like my voice speaking about the 0 point, and sometimes I would reverse this. I would do all kinds of funny things with it, and frequency wise, then I would just put in like a synthesizer out of this program. I would just play it out of my keyboard, my inbuilt keyboard here. So yeah, that's just one example of selection and combination. That's I think similar to what you're saying, that we're given the freedom to bear meaninglessness, and people will construct meanings out of that because that's what human beings do. So it doesn't mean you're messing people up. You're actually just giving them improbable probabilities so they could paraphrase things with a lot of trust on our part that you're going to integrate that no matter what. Okay, thank you. Amazing. It's really nice to see the Asian and the Americas actually speaking through a lot of these different topics. Anyone else would like to share? Any question or any insight, anything you're picking up? Otherwise, then yeah, we would close soon. This has been a rewarding call already. Okay, then. Yeah. So I hope the call was interesting for those who are looking into structure, that inner dance is a kind of structuralism. We are continuing the structuralist project through vibration. We're bringing back I hope you got that point at least, that a lot of structuralism actually moved vibration away, thinking that doesn't really mean anything. We're bringing that back into the form-content relationship, where vibration is actually form. It holds form to the meanings. So that could contribute to structure.
Sorry,
Yes.
there's just
Mm,
two things
Laura.
that are burning to be shared. I'm still in the hotel in town. I've been addicted to playing Anything is Possible this past few days that I've been recovering from something. And it's so funny. It just came to my mind right now that I actually couldn't journey into it. What happened is I ended up hearing every single sound in it. Like I'm laughing at many parts that it's actually Pi's voice, and and because I'm super visual, the way I could understand any sound is it has to be translated into image first, and then I see so much image, but I couldn't journey into space because it keeps making me awake and it keeps making me see the structure of the music, which is super funny. But yeah, that's just what I want to say. I couldn't. I said I'm gonna journey into this, and I just keep playing Anything is Possible, and it's always like an addiction to it. But one more thing, and it's not a question or not a long sharing, but since we started with Saul sharing about the Vanuatu experience, which I guess up to this time I still cannot properly put words into that experience of ours of inner dance family in particular, and at the same time the topic of loop and time and timelessness. And one thing I want to or one thing that I kept seeing in my brain the whole time we're in this Zoom call was when we were holding the space for the Chinese woman in the room that we created. And we actually were so tired because it was overnight and we were just
She was in it for
exchanging
3 days. She didn't eat or
the,
sleep for 3 days.
exchanging the effort to just watch her if she's not gonna run outside the room or do something. But actually, if you remember, you were actually just playing the same song, so she was actually in a very very long loop. I think maybe there's yeah, at some point in the evening, everyone was tired. You're tired, Trina's was tired, I was tired, so no one is actually changing the music, and it was just a very very long loop. But I was awake most of the evening, the whole evening, because I was so mesmerized how her journey of from being a very skeptical first timer to inner dance Chinese body into this goddess, Chinese dragon, ancestral uh, dimensions, generations over generations of Chinese wisdom flowing through the movements of our hands and through this unforgettable smile and gentle breeze from her breath and silence. So yeah, I just put it back to your memory because that's what I could feel is going into um time in a different space of time within a very long loop. Just to summarize.
Yeah, that's really true. That was maybe one of the most intense. We've seen a lot of intense, but but just to give it context to people, there were these Chinese people coming from Australia who were from the eco village movements who weren't really coming for inner dance. And then on her first process, her body started to move until she entered into this altered state, this pure trance where she became another person altogether. She was initially shy, not really outspoken, and then the movements just took over her body, and then she was just the whole time, 3 days, no sleeping, no eating, no drinking. I don't even remember if she needed to go to the toilet. She became pure energy. So when I speak about the Chinese often, Singaporean, Malaysian, Taiwanese, whatever Chinese, it's like they're all over the place. It's 20% of the world's population. It's so right-brained that the Chinese language is the most right-brained language, Mandarin especially, that when you awaken that, it's pure inner dance and it's pure space. But there was something about her being in space that was pure ancestry as well, where what was speaking through her body was the culture, the body, the embodied mind. So Vanuatu is really important to bring up because in my own journey, I was immersed in Western philosophy, but I went deep into the tribe. I lived with the tribal people in the Philippines. Flora visited that same tribe. So then we went to Vanuatu, which is in Oceania, which is supposedly the one most preserved oral tradition on earth, where it's pure indigenous. It's like for them to construct a science, it needs to be through a story. It needs to be through what is embedded in the oral tradition. And that story was pure magic. All the stories are coming from like symbol. They were still close to the ancestors where everything had a reason for why it is now. It's because like this god or that demigod, or they they transmitted the whole sense to earth through those stories that might be interesting for a child, but also for an anthropologist and definitely for anyone visiting the spiritual realms. So that was really interesting that time. We then closed off this one hut in the middle of nowhere, so there was no light coming through. And it was the same. I don't even remember we played the same song. I think my intention was to hold her in it for as long as possible. I was interested in just holding the space for her and not letting her go out of it if she didn't want to. It was a really interesting time. People didn't know what was happening. They would walk into a room and it was like the womb room in the jungle in the middle of nowhere. So this speaks a lot to the Asiatics who are in this call. There's a lot of you. Beware, be excited, be interested, be curious. Space and time is very, very extreme where you guys are at. Okay, let's give one last chance for anyone who would like to speak anything that wishes to be spoken. I have about 13 minutes.
Hi, Fiona here. So I'm really curious about people processing whatever they need during a session with different amount of times. Oftentimes I find that people need at least half an hour to at least go somewhere to their insights. But for me, I go in almost immediately, and mine is like 3-4 times faster than a lot of people. And then I'm done within like 15 to 20 minutes. And it feels like 45 minutes to me. Half an hour feels like over an hour to me. And when it comes to doing a 1-hour session, it feels like 2-3 hours for me. So I'm curious about this time thing for me. Yeah, because holding space and receiving it for me is completely different. So
Okay, yeah. So I think just to go quick into that, like the traditional inner dance frameworks took time, which is nice as well, but the new methods are a lot quicker. So I think you're more in this new generation of like just go there, go straight there, and like in the schools, we're conducting 10 minutes, and it's more than enough for a lot of people. They go so deep that the processing time would be actually, when I hear you say processing time, I was initially thinking like after the process, how long does it take for them to come back? But I think you were speaking more about the processing is happening within the journey itself. So I think because of the new tools that are coming out, people can tend to go quicker. Or is your community one that has already done a lot of work? Definitely, it will go quicker as well. Carly.
Hello. I just wanted to pop on real quick and give my gratitude, because the thing that I wanted to bring up and talk about is actually what you talked about tonight, about the structure of the playlists and the dimensionality that people go in. So I've been noticing in my own personal practice that I have a more journey focused experience during like the sequential songs or playlists that have more emotionality within them. And when things are more layered and that space is pulling outwards and having that decomposition and deconstruction, I'm really able to feel into that. But personally, I already feel like I'm decomposed so much that it brings me to a less grounded space where, like in normal time, I forget what words to use or my placeholders in a lot of my daily life. So I'm going to try to stick with more of the structured playlists, or the ones that like in the, what is it, 7 stages playlist or the playlists folder, so that I can see if that brings a little bit more semblance. Yeah, 7 states. And see if that brings a little bit more like cohesion to my integration process, not only within this process and understanding, but with all the other spiritual processes that I'm going on in the rest of my life. Yeah,
You
so
know
I
what?
wanted to
What
thank
could
you
be
for expanding
interesting?
on that without having to
Wh-
ask.
What could be interesting around time is maybe looking as well into the more study and create playlist models that have been coming out. When you look at 7 states, there's still a sharp movement between different types of tempos and rhythms and textures. The ones that are being constructed that could bring people more back into language and thought structure and organization is having more steady rhythmicity, but still having more access to the layers which our brains currently need, that brings about insight. So we ourselves can construct that, like all of us, now that we're studying, we can challenge ourselves. What would be the playlist that I would give myself that might be relevant for a lot of people needing, let's say, grounding and so on and so forth. Yeah. So
Awesome. Thank you for adding to that, because I was yeah, I'll be more inclusive with the expansion of the expansion.
yeah. Yeah, and there's so much diversity that we're looking at all these, so whatever works, right? And then we feedback, we document, we study. All right, anyone else? Last chance. Yeah, so I think we're good. Help me to close and we keep the conversation going. This has been rich and enjoyable. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
After
Thank
sleep.
you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
And thank you,
Ciao.
Saula,
Thank
for
you. Bye.
starting the call as well. Okay. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.